Hello, everybody. We have Joe today, and would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, hi, I'm Joe Parvizi. I'm a podcaster and author of the book Good Listen.
So, Joe, could you please tell us a bit more about the book that you have written?
Yeah, so I spent basically my entire adult life working in traditional legacy media. I worked in a morning radio show in New York City in the States. And one thing that I realized not until I was finishing up my career there was how much I learned. As many of us do, we kind of lack self-awareness and we don't realize what we've actually learned through our journeys. And so after I left a career in radio and pivoted into podcasting full time, I came to the realization that not a lot of people have the same skill set that I do, and that comes from having to do a 4 hour live radio show 5 days a week for over 20 years. Again, took a lot of that stuff for granted. And then when I started working in podcasting, consulting people, coaching people how to do podcasts, I realized they don't have that wealth of experience, that bank of facts and information that could help them become better at communicating, be better podcasters, be better humans. Frankly, I mean, the book that I wrote is not strictly just if you want to be a podcaster, or you want to be an influencer, or you want to be someone who is a high authority. It's really someone who's on the search to become better at connecting and communicating with other people.
Well, that's very interesting, and sort of provided that how hectic life is for some people these days. Um, so, what is one thing from the book, sort of one main point you'd like to sort of tell everybody?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I talk about in the book is this idea of making sure that when you're having a conversation with someone, that other someone is comfortable, so comfortable that they would be the person that would go into your refrigerator and take your last beer. Like you want to have a connection with someone so comfortable where they feel like they're your friend, they feel like you're a colleague, someone they could depend on just having one conversation.
Hmm.
And one of the lessons I learned from my experience was I was during when I was on my morning show, Taylor Swift was scheduled to appear on the show, and like many radio shows, we would video record the interview that was going on in the studio and then post it on our website. And at the time, Taylor's team was sort of trying to control the narrative and trying to control how much Taylor content was out there. So prior to agreeing for her to appear on the radio show, her people said that we could only video record the first 5 minutes of the interview.
Hmm.
And as most people who have worked in any kind of media where you're speaking to other people, like the first 5 minutes are usually garbage. Like it's usually get to know you, how's the weather, what's going on, how are the kids. So me as someone who is just all about like, hey, let's get the best thing possible, I was pissed. I was like, well, we're going to have Taylor Swift here and we're not going to have access to great content because those first 5 minutes are going to be terrible. And for whatever reason, this really bothered me. And so when Taylor walked in through the studio, she has her team with her, not a huge team, but like a few people. Her publicist walked straight to the videographer who's standing a few feet away from me. And she said, hey, just a reminder, we're going to video record only the first 5 minutes. Once we get to the 5 minute mark, I'm going to tap your shoulder and then just lower the camera. Like they didn't even trust us to like hit stop. Like we had to literally lower the camera. And I had been thinking about this the whole week. I'm like, this is bull. I can't believe that we can't record this entire interview. So then I decided to be a dick about it. And so after the publicist had said to the videographer, like, here's the deal, I decided to ask this publicist a question. And I said, hey, what if we have a follow up question to that last question at the 5 minute mark? Couldn't we continue recording? And the person was like, yeah, I mean, I guess, yeah, I'm sure it's fine. Well, yeah, it's fine. And then I said, well, what if we have a follow up question to the first follow up question? Are we still okay to record? And at this point, the publicist was very confused, like didn't know how to answer, was kind of flummoxed. I'm like, yeah, sure. And then, of course, because I was so annoyed and like I said, was a dick about it, I said, what if we have a follow up question to the first follow up question, that follow up the second follow up question, and we have a third follow up question? Could we still record? And at this point, the publicist had no idea what to say, but Taylor Swift was on the other side of the room, me not even knowing that she was listening to any of this, says, "Boy, someone woke up feeling saucy this morning," and the whole room felt quiet. Like it was your literal mic drop, pin drop moment of just like the entire room just stopping in time. And everyone kind of just like looked around and we just kind of changed the subject and we went on with the recording. And during the entire recording, Taylor was very standoffish, very defensive because I had created this environment of like, oh, they're not making me feel welcome here. And I learned my lesson there that, you know, it's not about me when I'm doing anything in terms of having a podcast, having a conversation with someone. It's really not about me. It's about the person there. And I didn't take that into account. I was just thinking about me. How is this going to be cool for us? How great is going to have this content? And oh, they're ripping this idea from us. This is bull. And so I talk about in the book how just the importance of making people feel comfortable when you're having these conversations, because if you don't, you're going to be wasting not only your time but the other people's time. And if anything I've learned from living on this planet is we could buy a whole lot of stuff, but we can never buy more time.
Hmm. Now, coming to the topic of time, it's a very, have you ever had this question about what is time?
Yeah, I mean, I have this a lot as I've gotten older, and it is funny how there's this adage. I'm sure you probably saw like it on Instagram, like the years are getting shorter, but the days are longer. It feels like days and months take forever, but like the years are flying by. The fact that we're talking here in 2025, yeah, no, I think about it a lot, and I think it's kind of normal for anyone who gets a little older to be like, oh, wow, there's, I'm closer to the end than I am at the beginning. So, yeah, that thought does come across my mind. But I think one of the things I take to not feel, steps I take not to feel neurotic about it is just like to make sure I take care of myself, make sure I take care of the people around me, and just enjoy all the time and moments that we have together. So, to be more aware of what's going on in your life. And like I said, when you're younger, you don't even think about it. You're just kind of just plowing through. You're just, how can I improve my career? What can I do to make myself better? But, you're not enjoying the moment. So I think now it's all about making sure I enjoy those moments between the moments.
And what if you could sort of turn back time or sort of go into the future? Has that sort of question come into your mind as well?
No, because I'm of the tact of when it comes to going back in time, the front part of that question, I would say like, because there's that old joke, if I knew now what if I knew now what I knew then, kind of thing, that whole thing where like, I don't think we would ever grow. Like if we were able to go back and redo mistakes, because then all of a sudden you'd have this, like this easy button, be like, oh shoot, I screwed up in my 30s. I can go back to my 20s and go back and fix that. And it's so I think that's the reason why you grow, and not only in your chronological years, but in terms of just your spirit and your mentality of like, hey, you learn from those mistakes. And in the future, like, hey, would it be cool to like find out who wins the Super Bowl or World Cup 10 years from now and then go back and place a bet? Sure, that's cool. But the idea of knowing the ending, I think we're very much, as you know, in this spoiler averse culture of don't ruin the ending for me. So I'd rather not anyone spoil it for me.
Hmm. Now, what if, let's say, for example, a series of events in a person's life, they are sort of predetermined, and that's something that's called karma or the law of merit and demerit. Now, if we take, for example, a timeline of an individual, and let's say, for example, in the 30s, there's a certain event that happened, or in maybe the 20s, there was this moment that you wanted to relive. What if you could go back in time and sort of relive that moment? And that's something that we're actually doing at Fique, which is called, well, if we apply the seven laws of nature within basically a concept of everything in nature sort of is based upon these seven laws. And it's sort of understanding these various laws in a person's life. And it sort of is in the borderline of spirituality and
Mm.
mystics. So it's But if that is something that could be implemented in a person's life, and we're doing that through fashion, through one of our brands, and you sort of wear a watch and you sort of select the time to the moment or sort of the year you want to go back in, and you can sort of relive that moment in the present.
That would be really cool if that was possible. Yeah, I mean, and you're actually talking about reliving something in your life, not like, hey, if I could go back to 1941 and prevent World War II.
This isn't like alternative reality or VR. This is actual life.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Because I'm one of, again, going back to my point of like, we live these experiences so we can learn from it. I don't know if I would want to go back to something and relive it because I feel like I think you've already taken away from that. You've learned something from that moment. So going back, I mean, is it? I don't know if it would be fruitful or something that could really help you because especially it's like if you ask someone like if you go back and relive something that you regret, it's like, well, I've already learned from that, so I don't want to do that again. If it was a great moment that you could relive, yeah, I mean, I only won one trophy in my life, and that was my grammar school lip sync contest. I did Bruce Springsteen, Born in the USA. That'd be cool to do again.
Hmm. All right. And what about, say, for example, there are some certain mishaps or sort of negative experiences upcoming in the future, and you can like go around those certain experiences. Now, that's also a possibility in this.
In this technology,
Yeah.
if I may be allowed to ask a question, how does that technology work?
It's based on seven laws of nature, and if the laws basically are the first law being the law of oneness, then there is the law of merit and demerit. There's the law of transmutation of energy. Now, you know that Einstein used to say that everything in nature, sort of energy can't be sort of created or destroyed, but can only be sort of converted from one form to another. And it sort of also comes down to the point that everything in nature came from one source. Um, let's say, well, that is God, for example. God made
Right.
all of us in his image, and everything in creation, from a particle to a human being to that table to that car, it is all based on that one singular substance, which everything else was transmuted to. So it's
But
sort of
you're saying,
understanding that one
but
singular particle and the interplay of these different laws in a person's life.
right, but I'm just curious. So, but how do we actually relive it using your technology? That's what I'm kind of fascinated by. So, how does that work?
So everybody has, let's take, for example, a seesaw. Everybody has merits and demerits in their lives. When there is
Okay.
merits, a person experiences happiness. And when there are demerits, a person experiences sorrows. Now, it's a very difficult, um, it's very difficult for a person not to sin in this world. I mean, if you sort of just walk around here and there, you kill maybe a million bacteria or this and that. Now that sort of is a sin in a sense. But the fact is, but if we have more merits, if we sort of turn that seesaw where the merit side is a lot heavier than the demerit side, then um, we sort of have these demerits being nullified by these merits. So
Hmm.
it's around this concept that we are generating merits in a person's life, which say, for example, in the instance of some negative experience happening in the future, that gets nullified because of this. Now, it also sort of connects to how these merits are generated, and there's a very specific method of generating these merits, and that's something we're researching within Fique as well.
Okay. Interesting.
So it's sort of borderline spirituality, philosophy, and sort of connecting that to technology.
Okay. And so, how? um, I know you can't give away company secrets and all, but like, so you're saying you've created technology where we can go in the future and avoid something happening?
Yes, I can actually send you some material after this podcast. It's like a video you can watch, and it explains the law of merit and demerit. Uh, it's sort of, let's say, for example, our life is a blueprint. Now, everything in that person's life is predetermined. Now, if we know in, say, for example, X year, X day, X time, something like this would happen. Now, because we have generated so much merits um, within that person's life, now that X spot or that demerit can be nullified through those merits.
Hmm, interesting.
And it's how spiritual are you?
I mean, I was raised Catholic. I'm a little more agnostic leaning these days, but I always believe that there's probably a bigger source out there. I'm not one to be, full blown atheist, be like, hey, there's no greater power and all that stuff. I'm very practical when it comes to that, but I feel like, hey, there is, there's something to, a higher power and spirituality. But in terms of a practice, I don't have a formal practice of spirituality.
All right. What are 10 tips you would like to give our listeners in regards to sort of in terms of philosophy for their lives? Let's say, for example, business.
Yeah, I mean, I'll be honest with you. I don't use 10. I have one. It's I and connecting to my religion growing up was the golden rule. Treat others as you want to be treated. I try to live that every day. So I think that's one of the things people forget. Even seeing a lot of very conservative people being cruel to others, I'm like, hey, that's really not the way we were raised, and that's not, and that's, I mean, the idea of the golden rule is just like, just be kind to people, treat people well, and then the rest will follow. So yeah, so I boil it down to one. I'm a very simple person when it comes to that. I'm like, hey, just be nice to people, treat them well, and then hopefully they'll do so in return.
All right. And sort of that's a very interesting concept. And that's basically the law of oneness, where we all originated from one source, and we're like one huge big family if we sort of put in that context.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I haven't had a chance to sort of read your book, but I definitely would really want to read your book. And
Awesome.
it's it's something when we sort of start listening to others, it's sort of we sort of start understanding a bit more as well. Sort of going into that you know maybe there's another voice that nature is trying to say, and we start listening to that voice, that sort of higher reasoning, rather than that lower reasoning that our minds are constantly like I have to do this, I have to do that, that everyday type of nonsense.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a believer in you have to see to be. I think if you see something, you can be something. So that's why people that the iconoclasts, the rule breakers, the people that have done great things without you know fear, or probably with some level of fear, but without worrying about failure, I should say.
Mhm.
I think that's what sort of built the United States. This idea of daring to dream, and once people see people in front of them, they can be something they want to be.
And let's discuss failure. What is the actual thought in a person's? Let's try to help our listeners over here. How can we navigate failure in their life if that is something that they're afraid of?
Yeah, I mean, one thing I will say about failure is there's been this whole sort of a movement over the last few years, which is like embrace failure, love failure. You know, it's good to fail. And I kind of laugh at it. It's like I see the positives of failure, but I don't ever want to fail. And I don't think anyone does. So when it comes to failure, I think it's just really more about um, if you are 100% behind an idea that it's living and breathing in your soul, then you risk failure. If it's something like, man, maybe I should try this, because you always see people fail on something where they were like, they kind of half-assed it. They weren't really all in on this idea. But I think I think an acceptable failure is when you kind of just push all your chips in the middle of the table and see what happens. And so I think people that are afraid of failing are probably because they don't have that thing that they're 100% passionate about, and that thing that they'll do whatever it takes to accomplish, whether it's a product, whether it's a movement, whether it's a business. um, I think it's important to know what you're risking. You know, it's taking those safe bets sometimes, but also being able to know that, hey, if I fail this, it's okay. And I think that's a mistake. A lot of people just don't know what that thing is. They think, oh, okay, I'll just do this, and it fails, it fails. But I don't think you really learn anything from that. You learn from putting your 100% heart, body, and soul into it, and then you can make it through the other side, knowing that you did it on your terms.
Mhm. Now, as we also discussed earlier, that there is this law of merit and demerit that also applies in business. Like, let's say, for example, within the blueprint of that individual, maybe at some point in their life, there was this failure that was sort of going to happen. Now,
Mm-hmm.
because of the generation of those merits, now we've also sort of prevented a failure like that. So there are sort of many factors at play. And I guess you're right that it's not necessarily that everybody sort of has to fail, but sort of it's also about inspired action. That if a person from within, they are sort of willing to sort of wanting to achieve a goal, and they put their mind, effort, and action into that specific goal that they want to achieve, then they're more likely to sort of achieve it rather than, oh, I wanted to do this and I'm just sitting around and maybe it won't happen. So,
Yeah, I mean,
yeah.
I say it's okay to. I think it's okay to regret how you did it, but not the why you did it. You know what I mean? Like, because the why is what makes everyone tick. Like, why are we doing this? So if your why is unquestionable, it's really just like, man, maybe I went around. It's the how. Like, oh, maybe I went around this. I did this poorly because I wasn't 100% in on it. So yeah, I think like anything, I think we all love to put everything in a black and white, check the box kind of world, but that level of gray, it's a huge gray. So that's why, like, when you say failure, like, people think, oh, failure, it's fail or pass. Well, it's most things in life aren't that. There's a big gap in between those two things. So I mean, obviously, we can all think about epic collapses in either business or sports or entertainment, but there's tiny little failures that happen along the way, and you just have to try to learn from all of them.
Mhm. It's I'm sort of wondering where the future of business is. I mean, the conventional, let's say, for example, 30 years ago, it was we got to make a profit and that's basically life. But now the business scenario is changing quite a bit, and it's sort of how can we sort of have an impact with this business as well as make a profit? So what
Yeah,
is your
I mean,
viewpoint? Mhm.
I think at the end of the day, though, I think profit is still rules the day, because if you don't have it, you're not going to have the impact. So I understand that threading the needle of impact and profit, it can be hard sometimes, but if you don't have profit, you have no chance of impact. I mean, think about the people that make an impact every day in our lives. It's like, and we hate to say it, but it's these tech billionaires. I mean, it's, you know, the person who created Amazon has changed the way we shop. The person who created Facebook has changed the way we interact with other people.
Hmm.
So I think they were able to do that because they profited, you know, and so I think it's important that anything you do has impact, like positive impact. But man, you know, and I'm not like you know an MBA or business expert or something like that. But I just know the bottom line is if there's no profit there, there is no impact. I don't think you could put one before the other because it's just not how the world works. Unless you're independently wealthy and could just deliver impact on a daily basis. If you don't start with that capital or profit, whatever you want to call it, money,
Hmm.
I just don't think you can have that impact.
Yes, that's true as well. I mean, money is still required to create impact, but also, let's say, for example, well, at least at Fique, what we do is from the proceeds of the sales of the garments that we create,
Right.
EMF protective, a percentage of that goes towards the foundation. Basically, all the fashion brands that we've built, a percentage of the profits goes towards a specific social cause, such as veganism, and things like sexual abuse, and a lot of different causes.
Yeah, no, it's great. But again, like you said, if you're not able to add to the bottom line, those causes will never be impacted, you know? So I think it really starts with like, do you want to have impact? And then start there and then be like, okay, how do I do it? And I do it by creating a business, creating a program, creating anything that can make money, and then that has impact.
Mhm. I would really recommend reading this book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad.
Oh, sure, yeah.
I think you read it. And another book which is in spirituality called Gyan Ganga by Saint Rampal Maharaj, which translates to the river of knowledge. And it's sort of understanding these various concepts, how spirituality can also impact the business scenario of an individual. Coming to that, I would really like to ask you, what are some tips you would give to our listeners on how to create meaningful connections?
I think it starts with do you want to create meaningful conditions? Because I think that's the important thing. Um, uh, you know, I work a lot with folks who want to do a podcast, and I always start with why. Like, why do you want to do this podcast? Is it because wealth, fame, influence, or is it because you love having conversations or sharing knowledge? So if you don't care about making, because I think one of the things with connections is people be like, oh, okay, I'll just make connections. I'll add people to my phone book and I'll have a connection. So I think it's really more about making meaningful connections and not connecting for the sake of connecting, because obviously with social media, that does exist. Like I'm not on Facebook, but there are people that have hundreds and thousands of friends that probably they haven't shared a cup of coffee with or had a drink with in their entire lives. So how meaningful is that connection? Sure, you could say I've got 1,000 friends, but are you impacting 1,000 friends? So I think it starts with that. Like if you want to connect, make sure those connections are meaningful, because otherwise, all you're doing is keeping a scorecard. Like, oh, okay, cool. Dick, I got another connection. Oh, another connection. And of course, social media like Facebook and LinkedIn will tell you, oh, you have X number of connections. But really, how many of those are valued? And I mean it in both ways. Like how valuable are you to that person, and how is that person valuable to you? So I think that's where you start, like making connections. Do you want to? And is it something that's important to you? Because some people may be like, yeah, I don't really care. I mean, I like to have connections, but I'm not gonna put any effort to it. And yeah, no, I think you have to start with the idea of like wanting it. Because if you don't want it, if you're just doing it just because, those connections mean nothing. They're like those random followers and connections you have on Facebook. They actually mean zero. So starting with the why you want to connect is the most important thing.
And how would you suggest that a person sort of filters through these different connections to find sort of meaning within that connection?
I think it's being intentional, like reaching out, whether it's on a weekly, monthly, or even semi-regular basis of reaching out. And obviously going back to earlier, we talked about time. I mean, there's only so much time in the day. So there's going to be some people that you have more of a connection than others, your partners, your family, your closest friends. And then there's going to be, you get into the acquaintances bucket, you get into the kind of know them bucket, but don't. So I think it's really about the intentionality and how much effort you're going to put into it. I mean, it almost goes into, romantic relationships. I mean, they only work because two people wanted that thing. Relationships don't work if one person has half their foot out the door.
Hmm.
And I think that the same goes with connections. If you're not building connections with someone who wants to connect with you, it's not going to really mean anything. So I think it's really just being intentional and the people in your circle that you want to make sure that you maintain that strong connection with. You are proactive. You're not just random. You don't just send that random, text on New Year's Day. Hey, Happy New Year. And then of course you look back, and then there's you haven't texted them since last New Year, so the previous message was Happy New Year. So I think it's important to be intentional about it.
Hmm. That's a great point that you sort of just stated right now. And I was just reading through your bio, and you're also into filmmaking.
Yeah,
So how long have
yeah.
you been doing that?
Yeah, so I was, growing up, I was always a film buff. I'm a 80s kid, so grew up on Star Wars movies and Indiana Jones. But yeah, no, I lived in New York for pretty much my entire life, and in New York, the great thing about it is you could take a class for anything. And I could use the word literally. Like, there's a class for anything, any time of day of the week, night, mornings, weekends. You could take a class. And one of the great things in New York, you could take a screenwriting class. And I'd always thought, like, hey, I one day would love to write a screenplay. And taking these classes, I realized, man, it is a lot harder than you think it is. But I was fortunate to find a collaborator with like interests. We came up with an idea for a short film, and we made it. And one of the things I'm really proud of. I mean, I didn't win any Oscars for it or make any money out of it, but it was just this thing that I talk about all the time is like, just make something. Because when you make something, no one can take it away from you. Like, I made a movie. Like, I can say that wholeheartedly. I made a movie. It looks great. It's pretty good. Like I said, I didn't win any Oscars, but I think it's a pretty good short film. It's called The Witches of Bushwick. Played in a bunch of film festivals. And so, to me, it was just something, it was a bucket list thing that I was like, I would love to make a movie one day.
Hmm.
And I always remind people, no one is going to be knocking down your door for you. No, you're not, those stories of old Hollywood where these starlets are picked out of a hair salon, like that is a 1 in a million or 1 in a billion or 1 in 6 billion, how many people we have on the planet. So I think if you want to make something, you have to make something. I have a friend of mine who has a teenage daughter, and she wants to get in entertainment. And she knew I made this film, so she's like, "Hey, any advice for someone who wants to make films?" I go, "Make a film." Like, that's that. I don't. I can't think of any better advice. I think if you and not a great filmmaker by any stretch. I probably couldn't have done this without my collaborator. But like any great filmmaker, whether it's Spielberg, Tarantino, Coppola, name it. If you were to ask them for advice, I would gander to say that I would say most of them would say just make something. So yeah, that's something I'm really proud of, is the fact that I actually did it. A lot of people talk it. Like, people say, oh, one day, they got their vision board. One day I want to do this, one day, and they never do anything with it. And so I was happy that I was actually able to do something with it.
Hmm. So we also sort of at Peak we worked on a film called The Silver Lining. That sort of, the social cause of EMF radiation. It's so difficult to get out there. I mean, all the ads that we've actually sort of started, whether on Google Ads, Meta, or anything, they all get sort of blocked up. And it's we sort of decided to encode this specific message into a short film and push the film out. Now that sort of turned out to be a great idea, and yeah, we also won a bunch of film fests and etc. It's talking about EMF. Have you ever been impacted by EMF radiation?
No, thankfully, no. So I can't. I'm aware of the acronym, but not really aware of its impact. But I like to say that our life is full of tiny bets,
Hmm.
and so um, you know, technology, for instance, in the States, there's this big controversy about TikTok, um, which is owned by the Chinese Communist Party. Is it worth the bet that a foreign country could have access to your information? And I think many people, I think there's 100 million Americans on TikTok. They make that bet. They're like, yeah, they might be able to steal my information, but I really enjoy this.
Hmm.
It's people who drink. They're like, hey, I know what this does to my liver, what it does to my skin, but if I drink a beer on a Friday night, I know it's not going to damage anything, long term. And so you make that tiny bet. People use drugs. People that people that do things that are unacceptable by other people. You make tiny bets. And so when it comes to EMF, it's like, yeah, I'm sure you've probably found that there's a lot of harm in it. And I think what people do either subconsciously or consciously be like, I get, maybe they've watched the film, like I get that there's dangers to it, but I make these tiny bets that I'm never going to live and be a boy in the bubble. I know that there's going to be shit that's going to impact my life, so I will take these tiny bets and hope that in the long term it doesn't damage me. But for someone to live a normal life, and when I mean normal life, I mean like actually going outside, touching grass, meeting people, there's a risk of anything. Anything can happen to you when you leave your house. And so we all have to take these tiny bets. And so when it comes to EMF and your question, it's like, yeah, I'm sure, the electromagnetic fields can have, harmful effects, but got to live your life. So I'm going to take the tiny bet that hope that these effects won't be long lasting or something that could damage me permanently. So yeah, I think we all do this, and so yeah, and I don't have a great answer when it comes to EMF. You obviously sound like you know what you're talking about and know done the research, but I have not. But I do know I'm aware of it, but I'm also aware of the fact that I got to live my life.
I agree to that, and it's it's sort of about it's something that's we're living our life, but if our life is being impacted by something, let's say, for example, cell phone towers, mobile phones, now it's not sort of directly our fault that something like that is impacting us. It's
Right.
sort of sending a message to those in power to do something about it, knowing that it's something that's harmful.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I agree, and I think people that do work like yours and bring it to attention. I think some people are not going to do that. So I think it's great to make people aware. It's sort of like why we put labels on things and we tell people what's in there and what food dye and all that stuff. I think as long as people are being shared that information, they could do what they wish. I'm very libertarian when it comes like that. You do you. As long as you're not harming anybody else, you do what you got to do. So yeah, no, I think it's something that we should always be aware of everything. We're never going to be experts in everything because there's just going back to our time thing. There's not enough time. But as long as you're aware and know, and hopefully, people that are causing damage by something, maybe they become aware of it and do something about it. But yeah, I think it's one of those things where there's a lot of stuff in this world that'll get you.
Mhm. And is there anything specific you'd like to tell our listeners?
Um, you know, I think I always tell people that you got to do whatever it takes to be happy. Whether it's in your job, whether it's in your personal life. And if you feel like there's something you could do to make yourself happy, do it. You know, like I said, when I made my film, just like I think a lot of the issues most people face is just inaction. So if there's something you want in this life, go get it. Go do it. You may not, you talked about failing. You may not get it, but you'll never get it if you don't try.
Mhm.
So I think that's something I'm really, really prideful about. That the idea that that I've done stuff that I've wanted to do. I mean, there's some things I haven't, and I can't be mad at the world for not doing it. You got to take it on the chin and be like, okay, I didn't do X because I didn't do Y. So if there is something out there that you want to do, whether it's a trip, whether it's making something, whether it's a meeting someone or doing anything, if you're not being proactive about it, it's not going to happen. Like there's just very few people on this planet that are blessed that like just just money falls into their lap or great fortune happens because of just like right place, right time. But I think it's just if there's something you want, you have to go get it.
Mhm. I remember there's this very famous quote, um, the only impossible journey is one that never begins.
That's great. It's
I
true.
forgot who that quote is by, but yeah.
Totally true.
All right, Joe. I think we've discussed quite a few points here. And now, in terms of networking, what advice can we give our listeners in terms of networking? How can that individual who is networking, let's say for example, at a networking event, make a meaningful connection there?
Yeah, I think the one thing is, and it's unfortunate, but I think we live sort of in a quid pro quo world.
Mhm.
So I think for networking, it's what can I do for you? Like I think that's a great place to start. Like if you want to network with someone, saying to that person, what can I do for you? Is there something I can help you with?
Mhm.
Um, and not only, and I know quid pro quo and like for this for that, it's kind of cold, but at the end of the day, we all have needs and wants. So if there's a person presenting themselves to you where they offer nothing, like they're looking for getting something out of you, talking about the universe, like it's you could probably say this better than I, but like what you put out, you get out what you put in, kind of thing. So I think being someone who is willing to do things for other people, I think that's a great way to start to connect. Like, how can I help you? How can I be of service to you? And then if they say, nah, nothing, I'm like, okay, cool. Well, if there's anything in the future you might need, please keep me in mind.
Mhm.
That's it. I think just giving people the opportunity to learn what you can do for them, that's a start. It could be as simple as someone who's just a an ear to listen to, or someone who has some advice, or somebody who can maybe connect you with another person. I think it all starts with how we can build relationships by helping one another and what we can both get from something in a relationship.
Mhm.
I don't, you hate to make relationships sound transactional. You would like them to all be altruistic, but, and you can definitely do that, but you don't want to live in a world where you're just giving, giving, giving. You would hope to get something in return. And I'm not saying monetarily. I'm not even saying in terms of, influence. I'm just saying that you should definitely try to offer and be of assistance than being someone who's just trying to take.
Mhm. Yes, there is this saying as well, what you give eventually boomerangs back to you in your life as well.
Sure, absolutely.
All right, Joe, thank you very much for coming on this podcast. we'll keep you updated, and maybe we actually have a studio called Elegant Halo Studios, and we're into making films that sort of are based on different social causes. So if you would like to collaborate someday on that, more than welcome to.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much. Thanks for the platform, and I wish you the best.